Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome back after
Welcome
lunch.
back after lunch.
This is the
This
last,
is the last parallel thematic
session
session for this
5A.
conference, 5A.
The session is titled
Nutrition Sensitive Agriculture Pathways to More Nutritious Food Systems.
Initially,
we had five presentations as per your agenda, but we have an addition as well. So we have in total 6 presentations in this session. To chair the session, I would like to invite Dr. Ram Shrestha, who is a nutrition researcher at Kafudat College, faculty member with experience across Asian and African countries. He specializes in applied and public health nutrition, leading studies on dietary intake, malnutrition, and solar drying technologies, while supporting training, research supervision, and community-based nutrition programs in diverse settings. Can we have a round of applause for Dr. Shrestha?
I think
anybody who's from Nepal already knows him. He doesn't need an introduction.
Our
co-chair for this session is Dr. Krishna Prasad Timsina, who's currently the Executive Director of Nepal Agriculture Research Council and serves as Research Director of the Nepalese Agriculture Economic Society.
He completed his
PhD in Agribusiness Management at the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. His research interests spans from farm business analysis, value chain, agriculture policy analysis, behavioral economics, agri-food system transformation, climate change, and international trade analysis. Can we have Dr. Timsina on the stage, please?
So since we
have an addition in the session, I'll just announce the list of presentations, and in the same presentations, the presenters will come one by one and make their presentation. We have the first presentation by Mohammad Saiful Islam, second by Mehra Bakhtiar from IFPRI, third by Mustafa Kamal from CIMIT, fourth presentation by Shobha Suri from Observer Research Foundation, fifth presentation is by Alan Debrow from International Food Policy Research Institute, and sixth presentation is Pepin Schneidmakers. Sorry if I botched your name, from World Vegetable Center. So over to you, Dr. Shrestha and Dr. Timsina, for your opening remarks, followed by the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think it's a very pleasure to be here, and thank you D4N and all delegates and colleagues who are here present to listen after your lunch. I think in this session, what I would like to do, one of the things is please think. Right. Before we start session, think that you are, not in Kathmandu, you are not in Marriott Hotel, right? You are not in somewhere. Just imagine that you are in a village, right? Where you are thinking that you want to really look at the nutritional, status of the people, food system, right? So just imagine you are in a village. There is a villagers, there is a cow, there is a field, So just remember that there is a food, there is a nutrition, and there is an interrelation. Right? So that's one thing I wanted to do. So visualize that, everybody. Don't close your eyes. You can visualize when opening your eyes, and then remember, look at that, and then remember, the theme, which we have here. Right? And then try to relate situation there and with the theme. Right. And then I would like, then when you presenter will present, then relate your questions raised from that situation which you are struggling, right? And then write it down those questions. So hopefully use that questions and have a very the discussion, so that when you go back home, at least you will have some of the answers or some of the queries have been, which you had, will be some ideas, right? So that will be the take-home message, right? So I think I want to start with that. So everybody imagine, think, look at, raise question, and then leave for the discussion. So with that small thing, Good afternoon, everybody. I am Ram Shrestha from Kafudat College, and I am very much honored to welcome you along with my co-host, Dr. Krishna Timisina, who is from the NARC, which is a very renowned research unit from the government in Nepal. So we both welcome you. And as I said before, I said, just think of those villages where you show that, imagine that you are going to a village and there is a house, right? And you can see the house has green vegetables on the roof, on top roof, right? You have vegetables and everything around the, that house, and then you have a mango or papaya trees, right? Just around that house. But then also, when you walking through, imagine that you have all these things inside that house. When you go, you find malnourished children. You find iron deficient women, right? So think about why that's happening. Food is there, people is there, right? Everything is there, but still people are malnourished. Still are anemic. So ask question, why is that? Right? And then look at another scenario, right? Where if you're walking inside, you will see night blind child. You will see the anemic person, right? But again, around that, you will see everything is there. They have gourd, they have meat, they have other things which is rich in iron, but still the woman is suffering from anemia. So what is that? What is the wrong? What we are not going to do it. Right. So third thing, then after that, when you are going around, you can see the water, buffalo, you can see the goat, you can see all those things are there. Right? But still they are suffering with this, protein, energy, malnutrition. So the question is, right, is that the right thing? Is it that what we wanted? So think about those kind of situation walking into that village, right? And then to me, I think I thought this a long time ago when I was doing vitamin A program, and it almost, feels me that food and malnutrition, they are growing together. Same house, same place, same village. The malnutrition is there, and the food is there. So it looks like they are growing together without knowing each other. And similarly, as if they are live side by side. And sometimes that time I was feeling that malnutrition is really walking freely through the farms. Here you have a farms. Malnutrition is really looking around that farms, right? And then playing among the vegetables, hiding in fruits, trees, and untouched by the plenty of food around it. So that's the situation where we are growing up, where we have seen it, and what is the we want to change. Right? So this paradox really brings a very challenging question. Why do communities that grow food remain malnourished? Why? Things are there. Another paradox will be, and how can agriculture nourish those who depend on it? Can we do that? Right? So with that kind of paradox, this brings to our session that very important nutrition-sensitive agriculture pathway to a more nutrition food system. How can nutrition-sensitive we can make so that it can bring a very nutritious pathway to us? So this session actually will explore how agriculture can move beyond production, right? Just having the food there, and contribute to the nutrition through certain sessions, through crop diversification, gender and nutrition sensitive intervention, home gardening, and integrated, not home gardening, but nutrition gardening. How can we do that? Right. So with that, let us begin our presentation. And we would like to invite first presenter, and I would like to my co-chair to invite that presenter.
Dr. Ram, yes. I would like to it's my great pleasure to be here in this session. So I would like to thanks the organizer also. So thank you Dr. Ram. So I would like to invite the first presenter, Mohammad Saiful Islam, Senior Research Associate, CIMIT. He is going to present the crop diversification with nutrition, training, boost food security, income sustainability, and agri-food system transformation in rural Bangladesh. I would like to invite Mohammad Saiful, please.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests and colleagues. I am Saiful Islam from CIMIT, Bangladesh. It is an honor to be here at D4N25 conference. Today I will present one crop diversification, how nutritional training can boost food security, income and sustainability in rural Bangladesh, offering the path of agri-food system in rural Bangladesh. Our work addressed critical triple challenges. Globally, 3 billion people lack a healthy diet. In South Asia, rice monoculture has solved caloric hunger, but not hidden hunger. Simultaneously, these intensive rice systems are a major source of methane, creating a significant environmental footprint in Bangladesh. Despite tripling of rice production, we are facing triple burden: malnutrition, climate vulnerability, and farmer economic risks. We urgently need paradigm shift to evaluate farming systems not just on yield, but on their nutritional output and environmental footprint. To tackle this situation, we tested a simple hypothesis: diversifying cropping systems, including biofortified crops, and including nutritional training, boost incomes, improve diets, and reduce the climate footprint. Our study focuses key dimensions: agronomic and economic impact, nutritional output, behavioral change through nutritional training, and environmental efficiency. Our ultimate goal is to develop a scalable model for policies that jointly improve productivity, nutrition, and climate resilience. Let's see how we conduct this research. We conducted this research in Bangladesh, 2 districts. This is the high brine tract, northwest part of Bangladesh, Rajshahi and Chapanganj district. We tested 2-dimension agronomic and socio-behavioral change. That is why we choose 4 villages in each district, 2 villages, where we one village only nutritional training and agronomic training, agronomic practices, and also another village combined effect nutritional and agronomic trial. For this situation, we calculated agronomic efficiency, that means productivity, economic and performance, as well as nutrition yield and carbon footprint using CCAP mode and food group diversity score. For food group diversity score, we survey 5 times after a training, nutritional training, 3-value interval. From this training, we calculated group dietary quality score, and also we statistically analyze all methods to understanding how it affect on and how it's better than rice monoculture. Now let's see the result. In case of diversified cropping system, increase productivity. We have 3 seasons in Bangladesh: Kharif 1, Kharif 2, and Rabi. Kharif 1 is pre-monsoon, and Kharif 2 is monsoon, and Rabi is winter. That means dry season. In diversified cropping system, from 1 to 3, or T1, T2, T3, highly significantly increase production. That means rice equivalent yield. In all among the diversified cropping system, almost double productivity over the farmers' practice. T4, that means rice mustard fallow, and rice monoculture, and rice wheat fallow. This is significantly better than rice monoculture in terms of productivity. Similarly, in case of profitability, diversified cropping system, especially rice, lentil, sweet corn in Rajshahi and Chapai-Nawabganj, more than net return we observed $4,000 per hectare per year. Traditionally, system rice mustard fallow and rice wheat fallow only produce less than $700 per year. So diversified system achieved 3 to 6 times higher returns than rice monoculture. I also calculate the economic efficiency in terms of benefit-cost ratio. Here we see that rice, lentil, and followed sweet corn in Rajshahi had a BCR, that means benefit-cost ratio approximately 3. Some cases it is 3.3, but in case of rice monoculture, it is 1.3 to 1.4, just near to break even. So the combination of agronomic practice as well as nutrition training with farmers who are receiving both agronomic training and nutrition training produce the highest and most efficient benefit cost ratio in both districts. Now we are calculated the nutrition yield. We are not only productivity as grain and income. We check it how it's improve our nutrition yield. Diversified system sharply increase the macro and micronutrient. In case of rice, maize, intercrop with red amaranth, followed sorghum as fodder, led overall the supply 78 to 91 adults carbohydrate and proteins, and 14 adults fat per hectare. It also, in case of micronutrient, it is drastically increased than rice monoculture. So diversified cropping system is not only food security, it is also a nutritional security. Now Now, we study with our group of farmers who are not receiving any intervention, and some only agronomic trial, and others both agronomic and nutrition training. We observe this data. From this data, we find that the highest nutrition diversity found in case of the farmers who receive agronomic and nutritional training. That is why a diversified system with nutritional training delivered a measurable nutritional improvements at the household level. This also we for our confident growth, we define methods we used for how diversification and combination with nutritional training improve our food quality, diet quality. Here also we found combination of nutritional training with agronomic trial and diversification works best and shaped than season and gender and location. Here also we tested the treatment and round interaction. Among this interaction, we found that at round 5, almost all methods showing similar result, and it increased 2.4 times than baseline the food quality among these farmers. Now it's not only our nutrition. It's also we also tested in case of environmental sustainability. In case of diversified cropping system, it's produce least emission intensity than rice monoculture. Now we need how to
Your time is up. Please wrap up.
that
Hello,
implication.
excuse me, Saiful.
Implication is our important. That is why.
Please, can you finish within a minute?
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for attention. Okay.
Also, you highlighted the economic efficiency and the its linkage with nutritional yield. So, and not only the innovation part, how the importance of the outreach effect. Highlighted. So, thank you very much. We have altogether 6 presentations. So, delay, I would like to invite the next presenter, Mehrab Bakhtiar, the research fellow from the IFRI. He's going to deliver like gender, nutrition, sensitive agriculture, innovations, and resilience. He's also evidence from Bangladesh. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great. I'd like to thank the organizers. Fantastic job. You've been amazing. So this work is medium-term evaluation of a randomized control trial that was implemented by the government of Bangladesh, and this essentially put together gender nutrition sensitive components as well as agriculture interventions together, and to see how that impact households in rural Bangladesh. This is a joint work with Akhtar Ahmed, John Hadnot, Agnes Kwesenbing, but there are also folks here who have been very much involved from the start of this project. So the project is called Angel, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Gender Linkages, and the objective of this intervention was to increase farm incomes through agricultural production and diversification, improve dietary quality through the consumption of micronutrient food, and to increase women's empowerment in agriculture. The focus of this conference is on scaling, right? So that's why this particular work is quite relevant, because the intervention was done by the government. So the path to scaling was thought carefully, because once the government itself actually carried out a program, the possibility of scaling actually goes higher. That was the idea. And also this intervention was aimed to be gender sensitive. So the idea is that husbands and wives, they should be trained together, and to break down the distinction between women's activities, such as child rearing, and men's activities, such as growing crops. So I'll just quickly go through the three main treatment arms. The treatment, this one is on agricultural production training. Essentially, farmers were given training to cultivate high-value crops and also nutritious crops, so fruits and vegetables. The preparation of small plots and homestead gardens. So the initial idea was to encourage nutritious food production in the homestead gardens. Okay. And we'll see later that actually translates to production in their main plots. Water, pest, and fertilizer management, harvest techniques, post-harvest storage, poultry, dietary, and livestock rearing, fish pond cultivation. The second treatment arm combined is additive, so it added nutrition to it. So essentially 19 extra sessions. The first one with the agriculture treatment was focused on agriculture. So this treatment arm actually had additional 19 sessions on nutrition BCC. So essentially covering the importance of balanced diet, micronutrients, and sources of food containing this, different types of food that could be produced, complementary foods, wash, etc. And the third treatment arm, in terms of intensity, was a bit low. So essentially, this was to improve gender sensitization, and essentially had 6 sessions, so almost 1/3 of the sessions for the other treatment arms. But again, remember that these are all additive. So this treatment arm got 17 sessions for agriculture, 19 for nutrition, and then 6 extra sessions on gender sensitization. So this is kind of the summary of that, with the control group, obviously. So in terms of program roles and responsibilities, this was implemented by the Agriculture Extension Services of the Department of Agriculture in Bangladesh. And the design was done by Helen Keller International, HKI, and they developed agricultural production curriculum with agencies from within the Ministry of Agriculture. They also developed nutrition BCC curriculum, and also designed and delivered the gender sensitization curriculum. So this was a cluster randomization, and there were 16 upazilas, and 10 blocks from each upazila. So a sizable sample size, I would say, and was carried out all around Bangladesh. The timeline was essentially between 2015 and end of 2017 when the intervention took place. The end line happened in 2018, right? So immediately, like one year after the end of the program. So the main result that I'll show you today is the follow-up data collection that was done 4 years after in 2022. So we have the medium-term results as well. So in terms of implementation fidelity, so there was strong participation. So women, men, they all participated. So women more, so around 90% of women usually attended the different sessions. So remember that it's not that women only attended the gender component. There was participation by both males and females in all the different treatment arms. It's just that the gender additional treatment actually had the sensitization component. Men also participated between 70 and 80%, thank you. And the training was provided together. More than 90% of participants said the contents of the training were helpful and informative. And I'll just show you. So essentially, this was the sample flow. We had relatively low attrition rates, and it was not different across the treatment arms. So attrition rates very similar and quite low. Important to recall that when the midterm data collection was done in 2022, so it was immediately after the worst of COVID had passed, and there was also a cyclone that took place. So just remember that there was an aggregate shock that took place immediately before the data collection. In terms of how we're analyzing the data, I'll just be showing you the intent to treat impacts. Again, we call these cluster randomized trials. We're essentially comparing the control group across the different treatments. So the first one is on livelihoods of coping strategy index. So essentially, households were asked if they had taken a series of coping strategies that may have meant, selling their productive assets, etc. So the first results we find is that so the yellow one is the agriculture one. So they don't behave differently from the control arm. So essentially, this is all treatment effects. Is a null effect essentially for agriculture. But when you combine agriculture and nutrition together, with or without gender, you see that households are undertaking less severe coping strategies, or no coping strategies in the sense that they actually were quite resilient and insulated from the shocks. So just recall that AN, so that's agriculture and nutrition, as well as ANG, they behave very similarly, and they seem to have been protected from the worst of the big shocks that happened, COVID as well as the cyclone. Okay, so in terms of per capita consumption, so on the left-hand side, these are the N-line results that were collected immediately after the program ended. So you'll find that compared to the control group, the TAN and the TANG, right? So agriculture and nutrition, and also with or without gender, you find very similar effects. So almost 10% increase in real per capita consumption, and that seems to sustain in the follow-up. So remember, this is just information-based BCC. There wasn't any kind of transfer involved. So the effect seems to have sustained in the longer term, particularly for the ANG group. Okay, and this is the empowerment results. So this is based on the WIA index. Many or most of you would be aware of the women's empowerment in agriculture index developed by IFPRI. So over here you essentially see that in both AN and ANG, like as well as to a certain extent just agriculture, there was significant impact. So between 7% and 10% increase compared to the control group of women's empowerment. Again, remember that in all the sessions, both women and men came, which is not usually typical for agriculture interventions. And in the follow-up round, you can see that the ANG, where you combine all of them, that effect actually is bigger and persists, but all of them they're doing a bit better compared to the control group in 2022. There's a lot of lines here, so look at me and not this. So essentially, if you look at the baseline information, right, and if the treatment effect seems to have been concentrated on households which had a baseline, which had homestead gardening at baseline, and they had some land. So if you have a homestead gardening and some land, those households seem to be doing significantly better compared to other groups, and the effect seems to be driven by these households. And this persists across, like the per capita consumption results, the GDQS results, so dietary diversity results, as well as a variety of other indicators. Now, what does this really mean in terms of, I'll just spend a bit of time trying to kind of understand these results in the context of, you've heard a lot about different BCC, SBC type programs in this conference. What does it really mean, I think? So the first one is mechanisms, like why are these households seem to be doing better for this SBC or BCC type interventions that focused on agriculture and nutrition, right? But kind of, just summarizing or crystallizing the results. So combining agriculture production and nutrition BCC, I think that's very important. If you combine them together, households seem to do significantly better, and they persist. It's important to realize that. It's over. 30 seconds? Okay. So the intensity of the BCC, that's very important, and how long you do the BCC. So these were quite around 50 to 60 sessions that took place for 2 hours over a 2-year period. So intensity, quality, and how long you do the BCC for, that's very important, and what you have in the BCC. So in this context, combining nutrition and agriculture is very important. Gender is very important. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Mustaf. Thank you for your nice presentation, empirical presentation. We know that the importance of the agriculture and nutrition, but you add the value, how the involvement of gender increases the value on the increasing the dietary improvement. So thank you, Mustaf. And so I would like to request all to like note down some questions. We will have a separate session, so don't miss to ask some questions. So thank you. So without delay, I would like the next presenter, who is like Mustafa Kamal from the CIMIT. He is going to deliver on the linking the production, diversity, commercialization, and the diet quality. He is going to assess from the multi-level food system aspect.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In this 10-minute session, I'm going to bring together some of my ideas and try to give you a perspective on the three major aspects of agri-food system, and those are production diversity, commercialization, and diet quality. So a little bit of background. Last couple of days, we discussing about the problem of malnutrition. That malnutrition is remains a persistent challenge in South Asia, despite of remarkable progress in the agricultural production. So and also in South Asia, it is over 2 million people lives here, and among them, over 1/3 of the region's population still can't afford a healthy diet. Moreover, micronutrient deficiency among women and children, those are persist, and at the same time, food system are rapidly commercializing, and markets are expanding even in the rural areas, and the consumption pattern are also changing, and the production system is still in the mainly remain cereal dominant after almost half a century after the Green Revolution. So these all together, South Asia is still now currently facing the double burden of malnutrition, and where the undernourishment and the dietary diseases like NCDs are coexist. And so to overcome these problems, we come up to some ideas, like the main knowledge gap addressed in this study is how production diversity interacts with commercialization to affect the dietary quality. So while the farm diversification is frequently recommended to improve the nutrition, evidence on its effectiveness is kind of mixed. So we propose that the part of this inconsistency, arise because of the commercialization fundamentally altered the role of the production diversity in the diets. So to do this, these are the data we used. We used mainly TAPSA, Transforming Agri-Food System in South Asia, which is a CGIAR initiative we conducted back in 2023. And we collected very high resolution. It's more than over 4,000 household survey collecting agri-food system related information across these 5 countries, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. So beside those household level information, that is very high resolution, and in our previous study, which some of you also maybe experienced in previous D4N conference, I presented the landscape level agrobiodiversity, where we estimated the production diversity at district level. So we also bring that district level, higher level resolution or perspective to the lower household level resolution. And the variable we use is for dietary quality measurement. We use GDQS, and this is come from the household survey. And also that household survey data, we also calculated household production diversity using we bring the ecological, the famous Shannon diversity index to calculate the production diversity. And also we calculated the commercialization index, and finally the district level production diversity is come from the national census level, district level data set from national census level list of the countries. And below are the some source, you can find out those letters. So the method we use actually is as our system is very complex, so we try to keep the method very simple. So our mainly the modeling strategies proceeds in stages of adding, like first of all household level production diversity, then adding district level production diversity, then combining both of them, then adding commercialization index to that model. Then on the fifth model we use production diversity and the commercialization diversity and their interaction. So that make what it's interesting. Additionally, we use other two models to see how sensitive our analysis is. And those are kind of cluster robust, as we are clustered at some district levels, and also mix effect modeling. And this is the flow diagram of that interactions. And this is the basic data distribution. The left one is the household level production diversity, and you can see this is more or less all the 5 country, 5 districts is similar. But the commercialization index in the districts from Bangladesh they are very high in commercializations, and for the GDQS you can see those 2 districts again, those are very fall apart rather than the other 3 districts in the list. So this is the simple association and correlation among those GDQS versus district level production diversity, household level production diversity, and also commercialization index. And this is the final output, not final, but the most complex results. So you can see the model are in the columns. So the first model we use production household level production diversity, and we see a small positive associations. And second model we add district level production diversity, which also has a positive associations, but with a little bit higher magnitude. And thirdly, we added we combined those production household level and landscape level diversity into one, and then in model 4 we added the commercialization index into the model. And here we see the commercialization index. It is negatively related with the dietary quality. So this is basically challenges the assumption that the selling more output automatically improves our nutrition through income. But the most important result you can find in the orange box, that is in model 5, we have production diversity rises to a point of 2.22 when the commercialization index is 0. So however, the interaction between the household level production diversity and the commercialization commercialization index is minus 4.11, and which is statistically significant. So this means that the benefit of diversification declines sharply as the commercialization index increases. So these are again the similar result. I added this to make it comfortable to see the significant and non-significant models and the variables used. And this is the most interesting result I'm going to present here. As you can see that we bring out that interaction of the household level production diversity and the commercialization, and we see the commercialization index and like 10% and the 50% and the 90%, and those are with the increases of the production diversity. The green line is very decline, and the blue line is kind of upper rise trend. So with this, we also bring out the marginal effect equation that tells us the association of the production diversity disappear when the commercialization values exceed 54%. And this is kind of explain why most of the diversification program in South Asia fails when they are implemented alone. So If I bring some key insight from these results, there are mentioned it's almost seven of them, but I bring for you only three most important key takeaway messages that dietary quality is strongly associated with landscape diversity, and not only just the household level diversity. And the greater commercialization is not consistently associated with the better diet, and is correlated with the weaker link between the household production and the dietary quality. Can I have 1 minute? So this also tells us the national relevance of the production diversity is context dependent, not universal. So we suggest this context dependent solution in terms of policy. So we split it into low commercial zone and high commercial area, and also mixed commercialization. And we suggested these policy suggestions, and also some scaling suggestion to achieve those targets. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. For your nice presentation. Really is a debate on the diversification, commercialization. So you have highlighted that issue. So I would like to invite the next presenter, our Shobha. Shobha Suris. She is going to present from Garden to the Growth, implementation on the research, nutrition garden, enhanced garden from the integrated community perspective.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to present our work. It's been an enriching 2 days of conversation, and I've really learned a lot from the insights shared. And it's also very difficult to speak after such eminent, robust research findings. But nevertheless, this is basically an implementation research which has been done with colleagues from the Vedanta group, which focuses on nutrition gardens, or Poshan Vatikas as they call it, in Nandghars, and how these can act as integrated platform for community nutrition. Just for clarity, Nandghars are basically modernized Anganwadi centers. Anganwadi centers, so-called the courtyard shelters or the community hubs, which are designed to meet the nutritional needs and educational needs of children under 6, and they also cater to pregnant and lactating women and adolescent girls, and it's a part of the social impact initiative of the Vedanta group. So the rationale, we have been talking about the situation in India, and previous speakers in the last 2 days have also mentioned how India faces the double or the triple burden of malnutrition, and these are some of the indicators which have been reflected from the National Family Health Survey. And the persistence of undernutrition, anemia and child wasting also highlights the need for an integrated multi-sectoral approach, which many of the previous speakers have reiterated. This is the one that links food, health, and early childhood development. Moving on, this slide shows the National Nutrition Program, which is Poshan Abhiyan in India, and this provides a bridging framework that aligns the nutrition action with the Sustainable Development Goals. It basically interconnects 4 objectives, basically ending hunger and ensuring year-round supply of food, reducing maternal and neonatal mortality, and also ensuring early childhood development in the early stages. Under the program, there have been a lot of efforts which have been undertaken for strengthening the Anganwadi ecosystem to make it more efficient, inclusive, and nutrition focused. And the Poshan Vatikas and the Nandghars, they kind of fit into this architecture of taking one of the buckets on the nutrition, the providing of the nutrition gardens for community-led food security. Basically, they also look at how enhancing local food systems with community participation and behavior change can happen. The methodology for this implementation research was a mix of activities based on the field observations at the Nandghars. This was done, this was piloted at Rajasthan. Interactions with the beneficiaries, the Anganwadi workers and the supervisors. There was review of the existing program process related to the garden development and the maintenance and the use, and also outcome mapping of the dietary diversity or the diet they consume, as well as the behavior changes. The overall objective was to look at what works, why it works, and what challenges still persist. This slide shows the Nutri Gardens or the Poshan Vatika at one of the villages in Rajasthan. As of today, there are about more than 1,200 Nutri Gardens that have been established in about 1,400 villages of Rajasthan. The selection of sites has some criteria, basically presence of boundary wall, available space, that's first thing, and then presence of the boundary wall around the space and the soil quality. And wherever these Nandghars or these modernized Anganwadi centers lacking space, the beneficiaries had developed the kitchen gardens or the Nutri Gardens in their own backyards, ensuring that no family was left behind. The vegetables and the fruit were a diverse range which were grown in these Nutri Gardens, and they have benefited more than 18,000 mother and children who are attending the Nandghars or the Anganwadi centers. And also the fresh produce from the kitchen gardens or the Poshan Vatikas have been used in the hot cooked meals under the supplementary nutrition, which not only looks at improving the dietary diversity, but also enhancing the micronutrient intake. Going further, the research identified several best practices. To name a few, firstly, it was participatory planning, as it involved the community, the Anganwadi workers, and as well as the beneficiaries. Use of locally available seeds and the organic compost. Water-saving techniques in the form of using drip irrigation, especially in arid zones in Rajasthan, and also helping the community build and sustain a function that could be more looked at like a behavior changing tool. However, challenges do persist. As Rajasthan is a dry, arid zone, there was problem of water scarcity. But then this was countered by producing and sowing vegetables which use less water, and also water-saving techniques. Seasonal variation did affect the yield. Limited technical knowledge about basically pest control and soil health, and the requirement for maintenance of these gardens under calamities, and also the need for labor. But these challenges also highlighted the need for technical support to be provided to the beneficiaries as well as to the Anganwadi workers, and a stronger convergence with the line key departments of agriculture and horticulture. This shows one of the model gardens developed at the Bhilwara district in Rajasthan. Here you can see the Anganwadi worker along with the supervisor. They have created a small demonstration garden plot using the minimal space and the water available. The women do all the jobs of, starting from sowing and maintaining easy to grow vegetables, especially green leafy vegetables. And this has also motivated the community and the families to have their own kitchen gardens in their backyard and their homes. And the impact was seen very quickly within a span of a few months, wherein we saw that households were cultivating their own seasonal vegetables in their backyard. This not only led to a better dietary diversity, consumption of vegetables and fruits, but also greater community ownership of nutrition practices. Looking at the significance and the application, nutrition gardens serve multiple purposes. Mainly, they are very practical, low-cost, nutrition-sensitive strategies to enhance dietary diversity as well as support the integrated child development. Especially, it also leads to women empowerment and agency, where you see women managing the garden, learning sustainable agricultural skills, and often selling the produce which is excess to earn a livelihood or to earn little extra income. Looking at the applications, as I said earlier, the food, the produce from the gardens were used for the hot cooked meals at the Anganwadi center. Some of these demonstration sites, they became demonstration sites for nutrition education and also recipe demonstration to teach families about seasonal, local and diverse diets. This also became a learning resource for children coming to the Anganwadi centers, where they could learn about colors, plants, seasons and responsibility and environmental care. Lot of self-help groups led micro-entrepreneurship were also seen, where women came together to kind of have these small scale units selling seeds, compost, and also the excess surplus vegetables for our income. And it was also a platform for convergence of the agriculture and the horticulture departments, leveraging on the technical guidance, the knowledge, the saplings, and the training for the community level scaling. Finally, to look at what were the implications for scaling and policy, it's a successful scale-up requires multi-sectoral action, as we have been discussing for the past 2 days. It requires coordinated efforts between the relevant stakeholders and the ministries, be it the women and child development, the agriculture, the education department, with active roles of Panchayati Raj and civil society. And also sustained impact depends on the capacity building of the frontline workers, regular input supply, as well as convergence with the local food systems and the nutrition mission. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sovaji. It was really enlightening for me. I hope everybody is still are in the field or somewhere in your village, right? Because she was reminding me, Anganwadi worker. She was reminding me, you know, how the garden to growth is going, how the nutrition, nutrition garden. I've never heard before that nutrition garden. Right? So I also community nutrition platform. I think these are very key words. You know, why we are here. And I think so far we have a very. If you are in the field, you can see. You know, there is a crop diversification. There is a gender issues, right? And there is also integration, right? So those things should have been there where you are in the village, right? So now it's coming very important. You know, without that, nothing will happen. It's finance. No money, no program. So here we have somebody, not somebody, Alan Debro, who is going to talk about innovation financing for livestock in Bangladesh. So I think this is also very important issues for us. Thank you. If I pronounce your name wrong,
it was just fine. The pronunciation was just fine. Thanks to the organizers for having me and accommodating my crazy schedule. I'm going to talk about innovative finance for livestock in Bangladesh. And as Ram just noted, you need finance to get a lot of these things done that we're talking about, and it's sort of an elephant in the room that hasn't been discussed, I think, at this point. So, in a sense, what we can say very generally about credit in low and middle income countries, so we can go beyond South Asia, we can go to Africa, we can go to Southeast Asia. In general, the credit supply in rural areas of low and middle income countries is below optimal. just to give you a figure, there's a survey called the Global Findex, which is financial index. It shows that only 24% of all adults in low and middle income countries have borrowed from a formal credit source. So that's including urban areas. Okay, so that's going to be much lower in rural areas. This is borrowing from a formal source. Why is that? Well, it's really well known that farming is, banks hate farms, right? They hate lending to farms. Why do they hate lending to farms? Because they're small in low and middle income countries, and they're spatially dispersed, and that here in Nepal they're vertically dispersed as well. So we've known that for a long time. But it's true beyond the farm as well. So in Asia, 97% of all enterprises are micro, small, or medium enterprises. They contribute 40 to 60% of GDP. They employ over half the workforce. And only 22% of bank loans, according to the SME Finance Forum, go to SMEs, I guess. And in India, only 11% of SMEs have access to credit. So this is not just a problem on the farm, but it's a problem in enterprises in general. So one type of micro enterprise we can imagine is people who buy livestock to fatten them. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And we're going to think about we need new ways. Basically, what I wanted to say with that slide is we need new ways of doing finance in rural areas of developing countries. So one clearly profitable opportunity in Bangladesh is cattle fattening in some areas. And in a sense, what happens is a farmer purchases a cow, they fatten that cow for 4 months, and then they sell that larger cow. And this is particularly profitable around specific times of the year, such as Eid al-Adha. However, the farmer needs that money 4 months before Eid to buy the cow so that they can sell the cow at Eid and make that profit. So the innovation we're going to talk about is we worked with a fintech startup called WeGrow to implement a cluster randomized trial around an innovative finance model, which was effectively a sharecropping model. So sharecropping is an old institution that takes place in a lot of low and middle income countries. Sharecropping for livestock is actually prevalent in Indonesia. It's called tesang there. And essentially what happens is the firm provides the capital for the cow to the farmer, and in their model, the farmer was supposed to pay for half of the insurance. So they insured the cow so that if the cow died, it wouldn't. Everybody would be okay in terms of money. And then the farmer needed to establish a bank account. Then the farmer went off and fattened the cow. They got a little bit of technical support for that. And we worked out with WeGrow that the farmer and the firm would split the profits 2/3 to 1/3, with the profit here being defined as the sale price minus the purchase price minus that insurance cost. Okay? We helped WeGrow screen villages for eligibility. So we needed to have cattle growing farmers with barns. There were a bunch of other eligibility criteria that we could go into if I had more than 10 minutes. The trial was implemented as a horse race. So we did this. We had 3 villages that received this profit-sharing model. One that received just kind of a straight loan, a straight loan offer, and then 3 that acted as a control group. And then we had a second level of randomization as well. In half of the treatment households, the man of the household received the offer to purchase the cow and establish the bank account, and in the other half, the woman received the offer. So I'm just going to really talk about take-up results today, and I'm going to try to be under 10 minutes actually. We collected data in 1,517 households across 105 villages in Rangpur, Joypurhat, and Bogra districts. Importantly, we included measures of risk aversion among the households, and all households had to have met the eligibility criteria already. So this is not like a random sample of households like we saw with the TAFSA. This is well, actually, maybe they weren't quite random, but we had them meet these eligibility criteria first. we conducted a midline survey and an endline survey, and we have some administrative data from the firm as well. And attrition is balanced across waves. So what I really want to talk about in my 5 minutes or two, I have two slides of findings. One is on take-up. So the first thing is that we did find that that farmers who expressed interest in the contract, we found more farmers expressing interest in the contract when we offered them the profit sharing than the loan, than the straight loan. So that was 39% versus 30% of the households. Remember that, so this demand is actually not that high for these loans anyway, which I wanted to make that point because remember we did all this screening first. So we've screened out the households that don't have good enough barns and whatnot to keep the cattle. We didn't find any difference by gender, so by the gender of the person who got the offer, which is in the second column. Second panel, and these are separate regressions. Note that actually not as many households that expressed interest actually received finance to purchase a cow from the firm. It was 24% and 21% in the profit sharing and loan groups respectively. And that had to do with a number of constraints, both on the supply side and the demand side. And I'm going to leave it at that right now. Because I want to make sure I have enough time to describe this slide, because this is particularly interesting, our particularly interesting result. So remember we measured risk aversion among these households, so we're going to just define a variable, which is 1 if the man or the woman is risk averse, and 0 if they are not risk averse, essentially, according to the measure we used. And so risk-averse farmers were less likely to express interest in finance, they were less likely to receive finance, and they didn't finance as many cows. Nothing should be that surprising. We don't see differences by the profit-sharing group once we control for risk aversion, which is interesting, but when we interact the two, and this is for male risk aversion, note that positive coefficient, which is almost the same as the risk aversion coefficient, the negative risk aversion coefficient. And what that's telling you is that when we offered that profit-sharing model to risk-averse farmers, they were effectively the same as if they were taking the loan. Note that that's not the same for the female when women were offered the contract. And what that's telling you is that the man was making the decisions in the household, even if the woman was being offered the contract. Okay. So then here are some impacts using an intent to treat effect. They were more likely to report buying and selling cows. They were more likely to have had improved cows. That's all good. But there's really no difference in the profit by group, and we shouldn't be that surprised by that because these are noisy measures. So to conclude, profit sharing is a viable contractual form for cattle fattening. There was at least as much, if not more, demand among farmers for this model, and there was some evidence that finance helped farmers buy and sell more improved cows. So there weren't enough cows for us to show impacts on income, but there was some evidence here. Now, we're supposed to talk about scaling, so the last thing I want to say is that there is a scaling note, and that's that the firm, the AgriFintech, decided it was too hard to work on cattle. And that's not surprising, right? Cattle are, it's more complicated to get people cattle than to work on a sharecropping model with maize or rice or the like. So they've actually moved to working on crop models as a result. And with that, thank you very much.
I think in Nepal also we haven't done that much work in this area. It's again home gardening in refugee camp, right, in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. So I think this will all be very interesting. So let's have, again it's difficult for me to pronounce the name. It's Pepin, and last name I skip. He's work in World Vegetable Center, and this is about the impact of gardening support provided to refugees in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And it's online. It's virtual. So please start with your full name and introduction. I apologize for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you there. And welcome everyone. And my name is Pepijn Schrijner Marcus. It's a bit difficult name, so no worry about not pronouncing it. This work is done together with my colleagues mentioned here on the slides. And I would like to first apologize for not being there in Nepal with you. I actually had bought my ticket. I was really looking forward to be there, but unfortunately, for family reasons, I had to cancel my flights. Next slide, please. Let's get started. Yeah, so a lot of has been said already about home gardens. Home gardens interventions, they always combine some kind of a nutrition training and home garden or economic support, usually with the provision of some seeds and some gardening inputs. Now in South Asia, as this session has already shown, there's a lot of evidence for the impact of home gardens in Bangladesh, in India, in Nepal. Lots of studies have been conducted and show that home gardens really make an impact often on nutrition of women of households. However, all of those studies are done for rural areas. Nowadays, however, also home gardens are widely promoted in refugee camps, expecting the similar benefits in terms of improved livelihoods, improved diets. However, there's very little impact of the impact of home gardens in refugee camps. Actually, there's hardly any study, and there's not a single randomized controlled trial so far that has been conducted on home garden interventions in refugee camps. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have done this study in the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, also in Bangladesh. Cox's Bazar has about 1 million refugees, one of the largest refugee camps in the world. Mostly of ethnic Rohingya from flat Bangladesh, should be flat Myanmar. And they're living there in about 33 different refugee camps. The area is huge. As you can imagine, 1 million people crammed together in one relatively small area. The intervention was implemented by 2 NGOs concerned worldwide and the local Bangladesh NGO SHAD. They supported for a period of 3 years. The intervention is still ongoing, about 50,000 women, and the eligibility criteria were that they are pregnant or lactating women. The intervention included promotion of maternal health and nutrition practices, awareness campaigns about healthy eating and dietary behavior, as well as the support of to grow seasonal vegetables and fruits and to improve dietary diversity. Seed kits were provided to the women twice. Next slide, please. So the research design, it used a randomized controlled trial that is clustered. Now clustering in a refugee camp setting is a bit difficult because we couldn't assign certain camps to a control and certain camps to the intervention group. But fortunately, camps are divided into blocks and sub-blocks. So what we did is the randomization at the block level. But of course, it's difficult to avoid spillover effects even within blocks or sub-blocks because the people are living very close to each other and information flows maybe quickly within camps. So that's why maybe the time between baseline and endline is just 1 year to avoid the risk of having spillover effects. Also, the NGOs, they really are obliged to support all households. So a long-term study was not possible. Also, the control groups at the end of the study were supported by home gardens. We applied the intent to treat principle, a difference in difference estimator, and the primary outcomes here are like the adoption of gardens, the consumption of fruits and vegetables, as well as household food security. I've mentioned here is that this total study included 538 women in the baseline, in the intervention, in the control, and about the same number in the treatment group. Next slide, please. Some of the sample characteristics, all the respondents were women, because that was the target. Their average age is about 28 years old. They have been living in this camp for about 7 years already, which is quite long if you think about it. They have a mean household size of about 5.9 persons. A third of them have never attended school, and almost all of them had already some experience producing vegetables before they fled from Myanmar. Next slide. Yeah, so gardening inside the camps is a real challenge, and that's the main reason is the lack of space, as you see in this graph. About 70% confirm that this is their main constraint. But other constraints are there as well, such as lack of the good seeds, access to seeds, controlling insect pests, expensive inputs, and also rodents, especially rats, is a problem that eat the fruits and vegetables in the camp. Other constraints that you would expect, such as water access, shortage of soil, we're not major constraints apparently for most of the women that we interviewed. Next slide, please. So these are the impact results, and it shows that a year after at the end of the intervention, there was a 34% increase in the adoption of gardens, so vegetable gardening increased substantially between baseline and endline. We also see that the women were able to produce for a much longer period of the year vegetables, so 81%. So basically they added one extra season of vegetable growing on average. We also see a very substantial improvement in the food and nutritional knowledge, and an improvement in the fruit consumption, and a very substantial drop in household food insecurity of 66%. However, we don't find a significant effect on vegetable consumption based on the 24-hour recall method. And some of the things that we had expected, for example, on the social effects of gardening, self-esteem scale, and we have social contribution, like basically social indicators, they're not significant. However, we might think that this is, for those social changes to occur, maybe 1 year is too short. Next slide, please. Some of the questions in the questionnaire also asked households qualitatively, what do you perceive as the benefits of engaging in gardening? And this is only responses from people actually involved in gardening. And this is interesting to complement kind of the quantitative results, because a lot of the benefits that people perceive from gardening may be not quantified. So like the primary benefits that we see in this graph, for example, are personal enjoyment, or the house looks nicer. Also, many households confirmed here that eating more fruits and vegetables as a benefit of gardening. However, earning income, for example, was not a major benefit of gardening. Come back to that later. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is actually the last one already. Implications for scaling a policy. First, these results of this particular study in Cox's Bazar showed that at least home garden interventions appear to be quite effective in a refugee setting, despite the enormous constraints in terms of space and various other constraints. You wouldn't think that gardening would be equally effective, but it is apparently quite effective. However, of course, more studies would need to be conducted, I think, to confirm this effect, especially for other countries, to generalize it. While I think home gardens are usually evaluated in terms of the impact on nutrition and income, we see in this case that income maybe is not an effect that we expect from gardening in the refugee camp. And maybe personal and social benefits could be quite important. So if you think about these women having escaped from Myanmar and are maybe quite traumatized, these social and personal benefits like finding joy or new purpose in life through gardening are actually quite significant and also deserve attention here. With that, I would like to end this presentation. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, can I request, the presenter to come and please sit on the dais. So we planned for 5 presenters and we had 6. So we are a little bit constraint of time. So the choice is either you give us more time or we'll have few people to question. So please we have 2 mics there, right? So in first round, let's have 5 people, right? And then we'll have the second round, right? So please line up and then ask questions. And please, indicate who you are asking, either whole group or particular presenter. Thank you.
Who to start? Okay. I'm Yamuna. I just want to compliment especially the colleague who made a presentation on the Nutri Garden. You said Nutri Garden. This is very common in Nepal also, in the name of kitchen garden, homestead garden, nutrition garden, and whatnot. So this is very important element we have in our farming system and nutrition. More importantly, what my request to you is, this is not only about the garden, this is not only about nutrition supplement. This is about women taking the decision what to grow, what to harvest, and what to cook and what to feed. So this is part of women's empowerment, and we haven't calculated its contribution towards the empowerment index. We haven't calculated its contribution towards the family health, but overall in our study, it shows that 200 meters per square of home garden can save 32% of the kitchen's expense in Nepali context. So please include the empowerment element into your findings and the presentations in the later research and the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Mizanur Rahman Sarkar from Sher-e-Bangla Agricultural University, Bangladesh. My question to Dr. Saiful Islam, your study cover in drought-prone area, you cover many issues, but we have other area also, hill area, coastal area, and Hawar area. How you will address this issue? I have another query, Dr. Mahara Boktiar. You use large sample size, it's fine, use many statistics also, but you revisit after 4 years. I think within these 4 years, many interventions have done, especially in agriculture. You use 17 lessons. I think other organizations also do such type of intervention. So how you control or remove this effect? Then simple query to Dr. Mustafa Kamal. In your model, in case of number 4 model, all variables are significant, but R-square value is very low, 0.036. How do you address this issue? Thank you.
I'm Faiza, and actually I have a question from 3 different presenters. One is Saiful Islam. So you mentioned the nutrition education. I was a bit, confused about the nutrition education, whether it was connected to the diversification of the cropping system or it was different from that. And also another question is from Mehrab Bakhtiar. Like I really like the study, but I'm so sorry I didn't got it. Actually, I didn't understand what was the connection between gender, what was actually the target population, and why, like, what was the overall purpose. It was women empowerment, like why the gender was there in the nutrition-sensitive agriculture. And also you mentioned the shocks. So was it adaptive approach, like during the shock? So it was an adaptive answer in the results, or so that is very important for me, because we are also going to start in adaptive social protection in Pakistan. And also another question is from Sova, that is also related to the dietary diversity. You mentioned that like consumption and growing of the green leafy vegetables, which is really good, but like it is not bioavailable if you eat without like combining it with the vitamin C. So are you also considering that during like with the SBCC? Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, Mahsina from James P. Grant School of Public Health, Brak University, Bangladesh. My question goes to Saiful Bhai. Maybe I have missed a part. You have collected diet consumption data by diet quality questionnaire, and you showed you calculated food consumption, FGDS, consumption score, food group diversity score. But I'm wondering how did you calculate the nutrient yield, the nutritional yield by nutrient level, and also will you consider to analyze the part which shows the unhealthy food consumption, because DQQ diet quality questionnaire gives both part of the diet, like unhealthy food consumption and healthy food consumption. And my another question is to Alan de Brau, that your model microfinancing to the cow fattening farmers, you concluded, but I was wondering whether this microfinancing nutrition sensitive intervention could work for cows, farmers who are producing fresh milk and bringing to the households, even in urban setup and in rural setup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all the presenters. So my first question to Mr. Alan regarding the microcredit. So yes, you have actually given a lot of evidence and system or model, but so far we understand, especially the MFI, microfinance institutions, especially bank, they are not actually more interested to provide credit to the rural level, the individuals. As you have the good findings, have you shared your findings to the banks or other MFI? Are they interested? If not, why? What are the major challenges you find? This is number one. And I would like to ask another question to what is name? Pepgin, yeah? Pepin. So you have actually shown lot of challenges in doing a refugee camp. Though you are actually find very good achievement, and 81% you have changed their practices. So are the refugees are interested to for the nutrition garden? And we are always focusing on the women in garden. Why men are not actually helping them? So I think it should be included. And for Mr. Bakhtiar, yes, Angel Project, you have a very good findings. And as D was the implementing agency, are they actually internalize this system with other opposals also? And what is their actually findings? And for the Suba, yes, again, you have constant of water and others, yeah? But also you have mentioned the water savings techniques. What are the magic techniques actually for that area? You have to mention, and you have mentioned some crops name. So what is actually minimum water get the maximum yield? That kind of practice and crop must be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it was very interesting, you know. There are questions for everybody. So either presentation is very well, right? There is something. So anyway, you know, let's just start, you know, because we have very little time. So here you go.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. The first question I think about our presentation was on, because it has been some time that the randomized control trial was implemented, and there may have been other things going on, other programs going on, and if we have taken that into account. So I think that's a valid question. But with longer-term follow-up of any trials, this is always a challenge, right? The idea is that the initial fidelity of the randomization, like the control group and the treatment groups, if that was correct or not, and it was, it's possible that because it was implemented by the government knows these are the people who receive this support. Maybe for other programs, they provide the support elsewhere, right? So that would be a problem, and would essentially mean that the treatment effects we're finding is net of that. So which makes, I think, the results even more interesting, because despite that potential, despite that, like, we are still finding effects. But there are ways to measure that. So for example, if we just run a regression where we try to see if they are receiving other forms of support or not, so we can actually run that analysis actually. So that's one. Sorry, there was some other question about who were the target beneficiaries. So these were households that were selected randomly from these villages, so no specific criteria except for the fact that they were involved in crop agriculture and that they had a small child. I should have highlighted that more, but that was the target population for the intervention. And in terms of the question on the coping strategies, so this was a WFP developed coping strategies. So when we say like no coping strategies, so we find differential effect on the two groups, the agriculture and nutrition and the one with gender. And what we find that these households are not undertaking expensive coping strategies that make them worse off, for example, by selling off productive assets. That's kind of the summary of it.
So you said, can we have more time? Good. Okay. Good. Please go ahead.
From my side, the question was why in model 4 the R-square value is very low. So if you see carefully that all of the models are having the R-square value is very low, because we are comparing the variables like across the food system. It is not the direct determinant of the dietary quality or diversity. We didn't include anything purchasing from market or getting from market, that kind of thing. So production diversity and commercialization index, that how portion they are selling to the market and what kept into their house. They are kind of actually, they have a positive association, but they are not the determinant of the dietary quality. Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My first question from Bangladesh Agriculture University. This question is, our research conducted on the drought-prone area. How can we address this result? Others agroecological zones. Thank you for this question. Actually, our basic principle diversification and avoid rice monoculture. For this, our crop diversification based on agroecological based and site specific. For this reason, we have suitable crop zoning. And in our country, DAE has the data of which crop is suitable. Based on this, we can choose which pattern will be fit for this different area, like southern part and eastern part, where we have salinity problem and some acidity problem. We have seed system. From the system, we can learn which variety is better for saline area and rice and lowland area. That way we can choose which cropping pattern is suitable for different area. And now, second question regarding education, nutrition education. In case we have crop diversification trial, as well as with combination 6 nutrition training, 6 session of nutrition training, different subject. Based on this their training, we conducted 5 survey. That survey dietary quality rated 29 questions in 24 hours what they intake. Based on this, we score their diversification of food intake. And third question that was also related, almost similar FGDs, how we it work. In these cases, we also similarly first we calculate the nutrition yield that based on DI dietary recommendation daily and how each crop food nutrient content based on calculate. Then from this we calculate the nutrition yield per crop per hectare per year. As well as similarly we also conference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I'll be really brief. There was a question about whether this model would work for producing fresh milk, and actually the answer is no. Because remember, what you need to do is sell something at the end, and with milk, you're selling something every day. So actually what we needed for milk, for fresh milk, is a different kind of innovative finance model, which would be most likely digital payments, because digital payments will start to leave a trail to show that you can deliver milk every day. And then have we shared the model with banks and MFIs? Again, the answer is no here. I think we would have to do a calculation to see if the model would work for banks or MFIs, and I'm pretty sure it's too expensive for them. So we haven't done that calculation precisely, but Mehrab and I will think about it. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the first question on. Thank you, ma'am. I think Poshan Vatikas and nutrition gardens have really shown an impact. And not only this, there are other models in India which have actually looked at the livelihood for women. And I think it's very important to measure women empowerment in agency in terms of being the nutrition and the food bearer for the family. I think that's a great suggestion, and we would incorporate it in the upcoming win. And there was another question on the availability, bioavailability. Yes, during the nutrition education and counseling sessions, this is taken care of. I mean, we teach them, tell them about the cooking methods, and also the combination, like we talk about iron and vitamin C, how absorption can be improved. So all these techniques are told to the women, and if they have any doubts or queries, they can come back to the next session and ask us about how the absorption can be improved. And there was something on the water management. Yeah, as I mentioned, we use the drip irrigation technique and also at places intercropping so that water management can be possible, conservation, and also the rainwater harvesting. That's a technique which has been now implied. And Barmer is one of the districts in Rajasthan which has actually, achieved great success in water conservation through various techniques. So these are some of the techniques which we have applied in the Nandgarhs for the Poshan Vatikas in the Rajasthan pilot project. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for all the presenters. It was very nice, and I think thank you for all of you also. I just wanted to say that because I have to bring you back to the conference hall, otherwise you will be in the field. Let me bring you back here, and the message is very clear from the presenters as well as discussion. Right, and if we want to break the paradox that we talked before, where food and malnutrition coexist, agriculture must become nutrition sensitive, gender sensitive, and diversified and resilient. That's what our presenters really highlighted. So thank you very much. And let me have my co.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ram. Yes, I would like to congratulate again all the presenters and good afternoon everyone. So, from all of this presentation, it is seems that like this nutrition sensitive agriculture is not the production of the food, is more than that. So the key message is like that integrated approach is required for sustaining the agriculture, nutrition and gender component to get a larger impact, and also multi-level strategy is also very important to have a quality diet, and also for the sustainability we need the local ownership, continuous support and collaboration. We need to work in the nexus approach, not in the isolation and the status quo. So linking with the like in Nepal, several since 55 years back, Nepal government has prioritized for the agriculture nutrition related activities. So since then, about 30 policies have highlighted the importance of nutrition. So, and trying different policy documents have highlighted the importance of the agriculture nutrition. So, in the research perspective, Nepal Agriculture Research Council has been working on this. So NAC has also some initiatives like NAP has already released some nutrition enriched, zinc enriched, iron enriched wheat varieties, iron enriched rice varieties, beta carotene enriched sweet potato varieties. So we have some initiative also in the nutrition. But the important thing is like we have observed here like separate presentation the importance of finance. So agriculture is so risky and vulnerable that if we work in the isolation, it doesn't mean. So we should have to work all the marketing, technology, finance, and all the risks like insurance. So if we work all together to get real impact, then it will work. So we should have to link the innovation, not only the technological innovation, all of those, the institutional innovation. If we combine both institutional and the technological innovation, then it will work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shrestha. Thank you, Dr.